On the evening of December 25, 2009, Manhattan was winding down from Christmas. Streets were quieter than usual, apartments glowing softly behind curtained windows. Inside one of those apartments, Shele Danishefsky Coughlin was finishing the holiday with her 2 children. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't dramatic. It was warm, calm, and ordinary, the kind of night that feels like a pause before a fresh start. Shele was a planner by nature. With Christmas behind her, she was already looking ahead to the new year. There were changes she was putting into motion, decisions she was finally ready to make. For the first time in a long while, her life felt like it was moving forward instead of standing still. She never got that chance. 6 days later, on the morning of December 31, 2009, Shele was found dead in the bathtub of her apartment at the Dorchester Tower. She was just 47 years old. Blood filled the tub. Her body lay face down. The discovery was made by the last person who should ever have had to see something like that, her 9-year-old daughter. Police arrived quickly. So did Shele's ex-husband, Rod Covlin. He had an explanation ready. Shele must have slipped, he said. A tragic accident, a fall in the bathroom. He pointed to a cabinet above the tub, suggesting she'd hit her head. The investigation didn't take long. Officers looked around. They asked a few questions. No signs of forced entry, no obvious struggle. Within hours, Shele's death was ruled an accident. The case was closed almost as quickly as it had begun. But not everyone walked away convinced. Some details didn't sit right. Not enough to stop the paperwork. Not enough to demand answers. Just enough to linger. The kind of details that stay in the back of your mind long after you're told there's nothing more to see. A healthy woman, a violent scene, a story that felt too simple. As Shele was laid to rest, her family was left not only with grief, but with unease. And somewhere beneath the official conclusion, questions quietly waited, questions that would take nearly a decade to resurface. Because Shele Danishefsky's death wasn't a tragic accident. It was the beginning of a truth no one was ready to face yet. To understand how Shele Danishefsky's life ended the way it did, you have to rewind more than a decade, back to a time when everything still looked hopeful. In the late 1990s, Shele was thriving in New York City. She was smart, driven, and deeply focused on her career in finance. Clients trusted her instincts. Colleagues respected her discipline. She had earned her success the hard way, building a reputation as someone reliable, sharp, and steady under pressure. But outside of work, something felt missing. Shele was approaching her late 30s and wanted what she hadn't yet found: a partner, a family, a future she could share with someone. In February of 1998, she attended a Jewish singles event in Hell's Kitchen. It was meant to be casual, low expectations, just a chance to meet someone. That's where she met Rod Covlin. Rod was 25 years old, nearly a decade younger than Shele. He was charming, talkative, and confident in a way that felt exciting. The connection was immediate, intense, and fast. So fast that just hours after meeting him, Shele called her sister and said something that stunned her. She was thinking about marrying him. Her sister urged caution. Slow down, get to know him, but Shele was convinced this was different. The age gap didn't bother her. Rod didn't seem intimidated by her success. To Shele, it felt like fate finally catching up to her. Within weeks, they were engaged. 7 months later, in September 1998, Shele Danishefsky's and Rod Covlin were married. Friends and family celebrated what looked like a passionate whirlwind love story, finally settling into something real. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Anna. From the outside, it looked like the life Shele had always wanted. But beneath the surface, the foundation wasn't as solid as it appeared. Shele kept rising professionally. Rod, on the other hand, struggled to find his footing. Attempts at building his own career fell apart. Slowly, quietly, the balance in the marriage began to shift, success on one side, dependence on the other. And it was a shift that would matter more than anyone realized. This is exactly the kind of story we uncover on Unheard Confessions, the ones that begin with promise, but hide warning signs in plain sight. Because what started as love was already becoming something far more dangerous. As the years passed, the gap between Shele Danishefsky and Rod Covlin only widened. Shele's career continued to climb. She became a senior vice president in private wealth management at UBS, overseeing large portfolios and earning the kind of respect Rod had never managed to secure for himself. She wanted him to succeed. She even invested her own money into his business ideas, hoping one of them would finally take off. None of them did. Rod drifted. Frustrated and resentful, he began pouring his energy into backgammon. What started as a hobby turned into an obsession. Early wins convinced him he could make a living from it. He traveled for tournaments, spent hours practicing, and chased losses with the confidence of someone who believed the next game would fix everything. It didn't. Behind Shele's back, Rod's behavior took another turn. He began reaching out to women online, dating sites, social media, players he met on the tournament circuit. At one point, he messaged dozens of women at once. The secrecy wasn't even subtle anymore. The gambling came first, always. Rod's moods grew unpredictable. He lashed out without warning. Sudden bursts of anger left Shele on edge, wondering what might set him off next. She began to fear there was something deeper going on, something unstable. At one point, she confided in others that she worried Rod might be bipolar. Then came another devastating blow. Shele became pregnant with twins. The pregnancy ended in tragedy. One baby died before birth. The other passed away shortly after delivery. Doctors later told Shele she wouldn't be able to conceive again. The loss was unbearable, but instead of bringing the couple together, it exposed how fractured their relationship had become. In 2006, they turned to an egg donor and welcomed a baby boy, Miles. But even that miracle became twisted. Rod blamed Shele for needing an egg donor and, in moments of cruelty, told the child she wasn't his biological mother. Control was tightening, respect was gone. By 2008, the marriage was unraveling. Rod suggested an open relationship, something completely incompatible with Shele's Orthodox Jewish faith. When she refused, he ignored her boundaries and continued seeing other women anyway, even creating fake profiles under false names. By early 2009, Shele was exhausted. More than that, she was scared. She confided in her sister that she feared Rod wasn't just emotionally volatile, but capable of something worse, something physical. And for the first time, Shele began to wonder if love had quietly turned into danger, long before anyone noticed. By early 2009, Shele Danishefsky knew she couldn't keep living the way she was. The tension in the apartment had become constant, and she was no longer just worried about herself. She was worried about what her children were absorbing every day. In April, she made a careful decision. She didn't want to erase Rod from their lives, but she needed space. So she rented an apartment directly across the hall and asked him to move there. On paper, it seemed like a compromise. In reality, it was the beginning of something far more volatile. The arrangement barely lasted a month. Rod forced his way back into Shele's apartment with his belongings, ignoring her boundaries completely. By mid-May, Shele understood the truth she'd been trying to avoid. The marriage wasn't just broken, it was over. She filed for divorce, and a court ordered Rod to move back across the hall. For the first time in years, the atmosphere around Shele began to change. She focused on work. She reconnected with friends. She even started dating again. People close to her noticed it immediately. She seemed lighter, more confident, like someone finally reclaiming her life. Rod watched all of it. During their marriage, he had secretly installed cameras in the hallway and spyware on Shele's computer to monitor her. After the separation, his behavior escalated. He contacted her employer and falsely accused her of drug use and financial misconduct, hoping to destroy her career. The attempt failed. The truth was obvious. Rod had taken far more money from their joint accounts than Shele ever had, but the failure only deepened his rage. In July 2009, things took a terrifying turn. Rod picked up the children and promised to return them by 8:00 p.m. He didn't. Hours passed. Calls went unanswered. Panic set in. Fearing for her children's safety, Shele contacted the police. Rod had taken the kids to a hospital and accused Shele of abuse and neglect. Medical staff quickly saw through it. The claims didn't hold up. Child services cleared Shele, and the children were returned early the next morning. Rod repeated the allegations at the NYPD. Again, they were dismissed. This time, the consequences were real. A family court judge restricted Rod's visitation to supervised visits only and ordered him to pay child support. He was also barred from spending money on gambling. The control he once had was slipping, and that loss made him furious. Not long after, during a confrontation, Rod choked Shele and threatened to kill her. Terrified, she went to court and obtained a protection order. For the first time, Shele acted as if her life truly depended on it, because it did. What she didn't know was that Rod was already thinking far beyond threats. By the end of 2009, Shele Danishefsky had made a quiet but decisive choice. She was done holding on to anything that tied her to Rod Covlin. On December 29th, she contacted her estate attorney and asked for one final change. Rod was to be removed entirely from her will. Up until that moment, despite everything he had put her through, he was still listed as a beneficiary. The paperwork wasn't finished yet, but the decision was made. Shele was closing the door for good. The very next evening, December 30th, Shele left her children with a babysitter and went on a date with someone she had recently met on J-Date. It was simple, uneventful. When she returned home, she spent time with her kids, playing with them, laughing, tucking them into bed. To anyone watching, it looked like an ordinary night. At 10:13 p.m., Shele briefly logged into her J-Date account. Then she logged out. That was the last digital trace she would ever leave. The next morning, December 31st, Shele was supposed to meet with her attorney and finalize the changes to her estate. She never made it. Around 7:00 a.m., her 9-year-old daughter Anna woke up and went looking for her mother. Shele wasn't in her bedroom. Anna walked into the bathroom and screamed. Shele was lying face down in the bathtub, surrounded by blood. Anna immediately called her father. Rod arrived quickly. He pulled Shele from the tub, called 911, and began CPR. First responders were already there when police arrived. Rod told them Shele must have slipped while taking a morning bath and hit her head on the tub or a cabinet above it. He pointed out damage to the cabinet hinges as proof. At first, the explanation seemed plausible. But as officers looked closer, small inconsistencies began to surface. Shele had visible bruises and scratches on her face, lips, and arm. Rod claimed he had lifted her out of a blood-filled bathtub, yet his shirt was spotless. And just hours earlier, Shele had received a keratin hair treatment and had been told not to wash her hair for 3 days. So why would she be taking a bath? The questions were there, quiet, easy to ignore. And for the moment, that's exactly what happened. Because the case was about to be closed, before anyone truly understood what that night had taken from them. Shele Danishefsky's death might have been officially labeled an accident, but for the people who knew her best, that explanation never settled. Detective Rodmore felt it too. On paper, the case looked simple. No forced entry, a plausible story, but the details didn't align. Shele's body position, the damage to the cabinet, the bruising and scratches that didn't quite fit a fall in the bathtub. Still, without clear forensic proof, there was nowhere to go next. And then came the obstacle no one could move around. Shele's ultra-Orthodox Jewish family objected to an autopsy on religious grounds. Without it, investigators had no definitive way to challenge the ruling. The case was closed, and Shele was laid to rest, but the doubts stayed very much alive. Her sister Eve spoke up first. Shele hated baths, she always showered. A close friend echoed the same thing. In all the years they had known her, they had never once seen her take a bath. Then another crucial detail surfaced. Shele had scheduled a meeting with her estate attorney for the very morning she died, to officially remove Rod Covlin from her will. At the time of her death, Rod was still listed as a beneficiary. If Shele died before the paperwork was finalized, Rod stood to inherit more than $5 million. The motive was impossible to ignore. Desperate for answers, Shele's family hired a private investigator, Michael Swain. When he examined the apartment, more red flags appeared. The cabinet hinges above the tub looked as though they'd been forcefully pulled off. There was no bath towel in the bathroom. Nothing matched the story Rod had told. 2 months later, the family made a painful decision. On March 1, 2010, they consented to an autopsy. The results changed everything. Shele had a fractured hide bone, an injury most commonly associated with strangulation. In April 2010, the official cause of death was changed from accidental to homicide. The truth had finally broken through. This is why stories like this matter on unheard confessions, because sometimes justice doesn't arrive quickly, and silence protects the wrong person. The investigation was reopened, warrants were issued, and as detectives retraced Shele's final hours, every path they followed led back to the same man. Rod Covlin. What they uncovered next would reveal just how far he was willing to go to protect his lies, and what he had already been planning long before Shele died. Once the case was reopened, the pieces Shele Danishefsky had left behind began to fall into place. Detectives retraced Rod Covlin's movements on the night of December 30, 2009. Phone and email records revealed he had been in contact with Deborah O., a married woman from North Carolina and a fellow backgammon player. The two were having an affair, and Deborah had traveled to New York to see him. According to their story, they spent the evening playing backgammon and separated around 10:30 p.m. But surveillance footage told a different story. Cameras inside Shele's apartment building showed Rod leaving the building at 4:13 a.m. and returning shortly afterward. When he came back, he casually handed a Snickers bar to the doorman, an oddly relaxed gesture for a man whose ex-wife would soon be found dead. Medical examiners later estimated Shele's time of death between 1:25 and 4:25. The window lined up almost perfectly with Rod's unexplained absence. As pressure mounted, Rod's behavior grew more alarming. He stole tens of thousands of dollars from his children's college fund. He spoke openly about violent plans against his own parents in hopes of regaining custody and accessing Shele's estate. At one point, he even created a fake confession using his daughter Anna's email account, attempting to shift blame onto the child herself. It didn't work. By 2014, Deborah had become afraid of Rod. After years of manipulation and instability, she went to authorities and told them everything. She turned over hard drives containing data from Rod's devices, evidence that further tied him to Shele's murder. On November 1, 2015, Rod Covlin was arrested, just weeks before a legal waiting period would have allowed him access to Shele's millions. In 2016, he was charged with second-degree murder. His trial began in 2019. Over 8 weeks, prosecutors laid out a picture of obsession, control, and greed. Witnesses testified about Rod's threats, his fixation on Shele, and his repeated statements that he wanted her dead. The defense tried to cast doubt, but one fact remained unchanged. Rod was the only person with the motive, the access, and the opportunity. The jury didn't hesitate. Rod Covlin was found guilty of murdering Shele Danishefsky and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Justice came late, but it came. Share this story because some confessions were never meant to stay buried. This is Unheard Confessions.